The rest of the world is to engage in this kind of nonsense. I do not want to waste my time to dignify these lies with an answer.
Sir,
we are here now.
Okay, sir, the United Nations, the United States, as well as the European Union, are now talking about targeted sanctions against the regime of Colonel Gaddafi. They're talking about an arms embargo, assets being frozen, as well as a travel ban. Do you think those kind of sanctions are going to have any effect on what is taking place in Libya right now?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I'm not kind of going to make here a decision what needs to be done. But I think that people talk as if there is a diplomatic and political vacuum in Libya. No, there are leaders in Libya. There are in Benghazi, in Misrata, in Tripoli, in Zawiya. We have lawyers, we have judges, we have political scientists, as well as the expatriates. We have a very capable, competent expatriates who suffered for a long, long time being away from home, and their time to go and rejoice is near. And those people should be consulted and should be talked to, even in issues regarding no-fly zone. These are issues that should be discussed, that if it is no-fly zone, it has to be targeted and it has to be limited, and there must be a time when the fly zone will end. There are so many instruments which I'm not at liberty to divulge now, but our most important thing now is to provide a protection for our people. We are not exaggerating. We have no interest in saying that one more Libyan is killed than the true numbers. Today, just today, a massacre took place in Tajura, and the world will be shocked when the world will know the true truth of this carnage. And I hope and I wish that the international and the world community stand by us, and we have no doubt that he will go. That's not the question. The question is whether one more life is worth him staying one more day.
Okay, sir. All right, sir, we're going to have to leave it there. That was Ali Ereshi, the Libyan former Minister of Immigration and Expatriates, talking to us there from Washington. Now, people fleeing Libya have found sanctuary on the nearby island of Malta. A U.S.-chartered ferry carrying around 300 people, mostly U.S. citizens, finally arrived in Valletta. Rough weather delayed the sailing from Tripoli for 2 days. Malta's hotels are already reported to be full of people who fled Libya by air after the nearby island of Lampedusa was flooded by refugees. After the revolution in Tunisia, Malta is bracing itself for a similar influx. Now, as those Americans left Libya, back home, the White House press secretary Jay Carney says the U.S. is finalizing sanctions it intends to place on Libya's government.
Consistent with the president's tasking to the government to prepare options to hold the Libyan government accountable for its violation of human rights, we have decided to move forward with unilateral sanctions, which we are in the process of finalizing. Coordinated sanctions with our European allies and multilateral efforts to hold the Libyan government accountable through the United Nations. The President spoke today with Prime Minister Erdogan of Turkey to coordinate our efforts to respond to developments in Libya and to ensure appropriate accountability. In his call with President Erdogan and his separate calls with President Sarkozy of France, Prime Minister Cameron of the United Kingdom, and Prime Minister Berlusconi of Italy yesterday, the President explained the unilateral measures that the United States is implementing and noted his desire to coordinate on measures that our allies are considering. He will continue these consultations to build international consensus for strong measures in the days to come.
NATO's Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen has called an emergency meeting to discuss the worsening unrest in Libya. The alliance will also be imposing sanctions on Libya, but has no intention of intervening directly. The United Nations chief has also been calling for action. To find out more, let's speak to AlJazeera Scott Heidler, who's at the United Nations headquarters in New York right now. Scott, what has Secretary General Ban been saying?
Well, he's been speaking with world leaders, he said today, and he addressed the Security Council Friday, where he said that they must take action to stop the violence in Libya immediately.
Today we have received further reports of violent clashes with high casualties. We have also further reports of gross and systemic violation of human rights. These include indiscriminate killings, arbitrary arrests, shootings of peaceful demonstrators. We expect the situation to worsen. The World Food Programme warns that Libya's food supplies are running dangerously low. In my conversations with leaders of the region and the world, and in my public and private statement, I have spoken out bluntly and repeatedly. The violence must stop. Those responsible for so brutally shedding the blood of innocents must be punished. Fundamental human rights must be respected. The challenge for us now is to protect Libyan civilians and do all we can to halt the ongoing violence. We must be mindful of the urgency of the moment. In these circumstances, the loss of time means more loss of lives.
And that urgency is going to come to a head tomorrow in the Security Council, where a draft resolution is to go to vote. Now, this resolution puts sanctions on Libya. It also puts a travel ban on Gaddafi and his inner circle, recommends the referral to the International Criminal Court, possible crimes against humanity. So we'll see that come to a head tomorrow. It's expected that that vote should go through smoothly on Saturday. And all indications are now, in speaking with some of the missions to the Security Council on the sidelines, that it should pass tomorrow.
Thanks, Scott. Scott Heidler there at UN headquarters in New York. Now, the demonstrations in Libya, as I was saying, followed the uprising in Egypt, which forced Hosni Mubarak from power. Demonstrations have continued in Cairo's Tahrir Square, where tens of thousands of people are pressuring the country's military rulers to carry out political reforms. They concern the military is not moving fast enough to repeal emergency laws. In the last few minutes, we heard reports of scuffles between soldiers and protesters. For more, let's go now to Nick Alexander, who joins me on the line from Cairo. And Nick, what can you tell us about these events in Tahrir Square?
It wasn't in Tahrir. It was close by, in front of the Egyptian parliament. And there was a crowd of about 200 peaceful demonstrators who had gathered there to call for the removal of the Prime Minister Shafiq. The military encircled the crowd, ringing them tightly. And after doing that for several hours, they used tasers and beating the demonstrators to get them to disperse, basically violently causing the demonstrators to run away from the violence, from the stampede. I saw people being kicked and punched and tasered while on the ground. I was kicked, and several people were detained.
All right, thanks, Nick, for the update. Nick Alexander there reporting from Cairo in Egypt. Now, in Yemen, at least 19 people were reportedly wounded after security forces opened fire on demonstrators in Aden. It came as tens of thousands of people across the country marched against the rule of President Saleh. In the capital, Sana'a, there were rival rallies of pro- and anti-government protesters. Earlier, the president ordered the formation of a committee to open talks with protesters who are demanding he step down. From Sana'a, Hasham Ahalbara reports.
It was a show of force by both sides of Yemen's growing political divide. President Saleh's supporters turned out for their biggest rally so far. And according to a spokesperson, the president was ready for talks.
The President Saleh has ordered and instructed his police forces to step up the security and full protection of the protesters and demonstrations. But the government view that the dialogue is the key to a better future for the people of Yemen.
But it wasn't the message those calling for reform wanted to hear. Outside Sana'a University, one demonstrator explained.
And we are now passing the message to our president and to the world and to all Yemeni everywhere that we are requesting the change, the whole change. This president and his family, they have to leave. They have to give the right to the people.
The beleaguered president is relying on his supporters who live outside the capital, his security forces and his ruling party to counter the growing demands for his resignation. He's already promised he'll stand down in 2 years, but not until then. With both sides holding out, a sense of anxiety pervades the country.
The capital, Sana'a, holds the key to President Saleh's survival. That's why he's so desperate to show the world such large demonstrations of support. But that's unlikely to change many minds here at such a critical moment in Yemen and beyond. Hashim Al-Barra, AlJazeera, Sana'a.
Thousands of protesters also took to the streets of Jordan on Friday, demanding political and economic reforms. Around 4,000 people rallied in the capital, Amman, amid a strong police presence. They're calling for constitutional changes. In particular, they want a limit on the powers of the monarch, King Abdullah. The leader of Jordan's largest opposition group, Hamza Mansour, says people's patience is wearing thin with the government's slow moves towards reform. Officials in Bahrain, meanwhile, say King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa has sacked 3 ministers who caused crisis after the latest unrest there. Earlier, tens of thousands of protesters gathered at Manama's Pearl Square in one of the largest anti-government protests since unrest began 10 days ago. Demonstrators called for the king and his government to step down. Friday was declared a national day of mourning, a week after 7 people were killed in clashes with security forces. Al Jazeera has obtained pictures of what appears to be police firing on protesters in the Iraqi city of Fallujah. Demonstrations against corruption and a lack of basic services have turned deadly in the country. At least 12 people have been killed in anti-government rallies across Iraq. And in Tunisia, thousands have also filled the streets of central Tunis in a day of rage against the country's interim government. Demonstrators shouted slogans calling for the resignation of former loyalists from Tunisia's interim government, including the caretaker Prime Minister Mohamed Ghannouchi. After controversy over how she handled the crisis in Tunisia, latest reports from France say the foreign minister is set to resign. Michel Alliot-Marie accepted flights on a business jet owned by a supporter of the ousted Tunisian president. Unnamed French ministers have been quoted as saying she could be replaced by the defense minister Alain Juppé. In other news, there's been a huge turn